and welcome to my favourite books I've read over the last 30 years. We're officially in March, which is my birthday month, and specifically it is my 30th birthday this year. So what I thought I'd do is go through some of my favourite books from my childhood, my teenage years, my early 20s up till now. So let's get going, starting with childhood. First up, I have 4 books to mention from my childhood, and the first one is the most obvious one, and that is Skulduggery Pleasant, because I could not make a favourites video of any kind without mentioning Skulduggery. I read this for the first time when I was about 10 or 11 years old, if I remember rightly, and absolutely fell head over heels in love with it, and to this day I am still in love with this series. If you don't know what it is essentially about Skulduggery Pleasant and Valkyrie Kane, and Skulduggery is a magical skeleton detective while Valkyrie is his human partner, and they essentially save the world from various magical threats, solve crimes and this kind of thing. And when I say this book really shaped my reading tastes, I am not kidding, because this is funny, it is filled with pop culture references, but it is also a really good fantasy and has a lot of horror elements in it, and to this day I still absolutely adore all of those things. I adore fantasy, it is 90% of what I read. I am also a massive horror fan, and I will also fall in love with any book that has pop culture references in there, because I am a massive fan of seeing those types of things, and this one has it in spades. It is also funny, the plot twist gave me whiplash throughout here, and 18 books later, 18 years later, I am still adoring every single second of this series, and I will never ever get over it. Absolutely, this has to be my favourite book of my childhood. Another one I really enjoyed as well was the Spiderwick Chronicles by Holly Black. I really enjoyed this series. I loved all of the fantasy world throughout here and all of the different types of the Fae. I also loved that this was illustrated throughout as well. If you can see that, there we go, you can see that. But I love that it was illustrated throughout here. I love that it was set in our world but with this fantastical edge to it, all of this kind of thing. It was so much fun, and I really enjoyed these ones. I blasted through them and will forever really enjoy them. Also, when I was a kid, another favourite was Larklight, and this is by Philip Reeve, and this one is a more sci-fi type thing, and I remember adoring this one so much that I would read it, get to the end, then immediately go back to the beginning again, and I mean not reading anything else. Literally, I wouldn't go and do anything else. I would read the last page, go back to the beginning and start reading again, because I enjoyed it so much as a kid, and I've actually been meaning to reread this one for a while because I loved it so much back then, and now I really want to see what I think about it now, so I may do that at some point like this year, and maybe do like a childhood favourites reread or something. That sounds like a plan actually. I may actually do that at some point this year. But I did genuinely absolutely love this book, and I just remember reading it over and over and over and over again, to the point where I could practically like skip a whole section if I wanted to. Not that I ever did, but like skip a whole section and still know exactly what happened. I could literally go back through and find my favourite scenes and just reread those bits, and I'd still know all of the context and everything else just because I read it so many times. I adored this book. And then the final one for this more kids section is more of like a series of books. I'm just going to hold out one of them though, and that is Doctor Who. I loved the Doctor Who books when I was a kid. I still love the Doctor Who books to this day. Who am I kidding? But I absolutely adored Doctor Who as a kid. I was a massive Whovian. I'm still a Whovian, to the point where I'm literally now going to Cardiff for my birthday so I can actually go Doctor Who location hunting. Literally, that is my plan. I am rewatching a bunch of episodes, and then I'm going to be going around Cardiff trying to find those bits and hunting down like the outside of Torchwood, Yanto Shrine, all of that kind of thing. That is literally my birthday celebrations, because I am that much of a Doctor Who fan, and that has not changed since I was a kid. I was obsessed as a kid. I read so many Doctor Who books, and two of my favourites was this one, which is The Sting of the Zygons, and The Doctor Trap. I loved both of those ones so much when I was a kid. And like Larklight, I could literally open it up to a random page or skip whole sections, not that I did, but skip whole sections if I wanted to, and actually remember exactly like what's happened in this book, what's happened so far, what's going to happen now, all of this kind of thing. I adored these. I flew through them. I read them so many times. I'm actually surprised that the book is still holding together because I read it that many times as a kid. Then as a teenager, I didn't really read that much, to be perfectly honest, because I was studying like Alice in Wonderland and all of this kind of thing in school, and all of the analysis didn't exactly kill my love of reading, but it just didn't make me really want to pick up a book, to be perfectly honest. Don't get me wrong, I was still reading. I was reading a lot of fan fiction back then and not very many books, but there are 2 books from my teenage years that really stand out. The first one is Unsaid Things, Our Story by McFly, and this is their written like autobiography memoir type thing, and I adored it as a teenager because I am a massive McFly fan. This thing here that's fallen off now, this is literally one of their logos as a bear. I bought this one even though I'm not a teddy bear person because it was a McFly thing and it was McFly merch. I've got like all of these, or 90% of these are like McFly bracelets. This one here and this one here and this one here are McFly things. My hair gets dyed 5 colours like every time I go and see them. I've seen them over 30 times now, so you know, massive McFly fan. So when it came out with their autobiography, I immediately bought it and read it in 2 days, and it was such a good book and such a good look into who they are and their story and everything else. There was a lot in here I did not know about. I knew about the addiction problems that Dougie had, but I did not know that he had depression or suicidal ideation. I also did not know that Tom had bipolar or an eating disorder. I did not know that Danny and Harry both had severe anxiety problems or anything else, and it was such a good look into how they got together, their lives before they got together, how fame then also like affected these things for them as well, how they coped with it and everything else, and came out the other side and everything, and it was just beautiful to read. I am saying this as a very, very biased McFly fan. I know I'm a very big Galaxy Defender and have been since I was about 12, I think it was. Yes, I was 12, so 18 years now. But this book just absolutely blew me away. It was such a wonderful look into who they are as people and everything else, and it made me love them more. I loved all of the banter throughout here as well. I loved also all of the photos, and actually if I can get the page up, well, that was them winning Strictly and I'm a Celeb, which was a very proud moment for me, I won't lie. But then also these bits here, all of these photos were from my first ever McFly gig, which was an amazing thing to see. Like, this was literally, like, these ones are my first ever McFly gig. Tickets have just fallen out from the book from the anthology tour, which was 10 years ago. Jesus, that was 10 years ago. Anyway, and then this one down here is from another gig I went to, actually, the Up Close and Personal tour, like 3-4 years later. But anyway, I absolutely adored this book. It was filled with photos that I had either seen before from gigs I've been to, or brand new photos, brand new stories. It just brought me, it felt like I got to know my boys. I call them my boys. I always call them my boys. They're not my boys, but I call them my boys. It made me feel closer to my boys, and that was just a wonderful thing for me. And I loved this book when I was a teenager, and I'm so glad I did actually read it back then. And then the other one I also read and adored as a teenager was one that most people also read and adored when they were teenagers, and that was Twilight. I was all over Twilight when I was a teenager. I was Team Edward in terms of the Edward versus Jacob thing, but I was mainly actually Team Jasper. Like, I was fully all in for Jasper, I won't lie, and I still think Jasper is the best character out of the lot of them to this day, I won't lie. But I did love Twilight. I had like the replica of like Bella's wedding ring. I also had like the Cullen like cuff that they had with their crest on it. I had like posters of Edward. I had like duvet spreads with like Twilight all over. I had Team Edward t-shirts, all of this kind of thing. I went all in on the Twilight thing, and I loved the books when I was a teenager. I have not read them them since. I've since, I think, unhauled them somewhere in some move or other, but I did love Twilight when I was a teenager, and they were literally the only fiction books I read willingly throughout my teenage years that were not Buffy the Vampire Slayer related, because I read a couple of those as well, because I was also completely obsessed with Buffy. I would say that Twilight and Buffy really sort of shaped my love of vampires, but to be honest, that would be a lie. It did mainly come from like Blade and Underworld, but I will say that Buffy and also Twilight really did sort of like give me another perspective on vampires that I also really loved, and helped cement vampires as my favourite like supernatural creature to read or watch. Then when I hit uni, I actually got more into reading again and actually started reading books again, and I found a load that I really loved, and the first one I have to mention is Vicious by V.E. Schwab, because this book in a lot of ways felt like it was written for me, because this was about two very morally grey superpowered people trying to kill each other with Charles and Eric vibes, and as someone who loved the X-Men from the age of 7 years old, this was absolutely my jam. I fell in love with it. It made me fall in love with V.E. Schwab as a writer. I had already read Dark Shade of Magic by this point and really loved that one, but Vicious really sort of cemented V.E. Schwab as one of my favourite all-time authors, because this book was incredible. I loved it so much. I love the dynamics. I love superpowers because I am a massive fan of superheroes, if you couldn't tell. Essentially, I loved the Charles and Eric vibe. I loved the morally grey like characters in here, and I genuinely think this book was kind of written for me in a lot of ways. It just spoke to my soul entirely, and like I said, cemented V.E. Schwab as one of my all-time favourite authors. I also got back into middle grade again with Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston, and this series was also incredible. This is very much like a middle grade version of Men in Black, which I absolutely adored. I grew up on Men in Black as well. I will say I love those movies. I still need to find the comics, but I loved the movies when I was a kid, and this really hit the spot in that sense. I loved reading this. I loved Amari's world and her story. I loved the Men in Black vibes, and this was just such a good book, and it really made me fall back in love again with reading middle grade. I had admittedly already read at this point Artemis Fowl and really enjoyed it, but this one really made me fall back in love again with that upper middle grade sort of like age range, and I really loved it. I also need to mention Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Shauna Maguire, because by this point I hadn't read any Shauna Maguire apart from Every Heart a Doorway, which I really enjoyed, but this one about Jack and Jill just got me, because this was a dark world with vampires and Frankenstein type things and all of this kind of thing, and I realised what Shauna Maguire could do as an author, and I fell head over heels in love with her work as well. So this one, definitely one of my favourites of my early 20s, still to this day one of my favourite series and one of my favourite authors. Also in my early 20s I read Not Even Bones by Rebecca Schaeffer, and this one I literally read because I saw one person raving about it on Bookstagram and took a chance and then fell in love with it, because this was another one that felt like it was written specifically for me in terms of the world, which is a world that's like ours but everyone knows monsters exist. There was also morally grey characters that takes it very much to the edge of morally grey into evil, which I adored. I loved every single thing about this series. It was fantastic, and like I said, it genuinely felt again like it had been written for me, and I literally picked it up on a whim because I saw one person raving about it over on Instagram, and it is still to this day one of my all-time favourite series. Again, it is not going to be for everyone. There is a lot of stuff in here that is definitely not going to be for everyone, but this is one of my favourites. I adored it. I also have to mention Legendborn here, because this is what solidified my love of retellings for me, because I'd read a few so far, like a couple of like Beauty and the Beast ones and stuff like this, and really enjoyed them, but this really sort of solidified that love of retellings for me, because what it did with Arthurian legend was incredible. I loved how it modernised it. I love how it brought into this world, brought that legend into this world as well. I loved the main characters in here, I love the storyline of it, and quite frankly, with every single book, the writing and the storyline have just gotten better and better and better and better, and now I cannot get enough of this series. I am literally basically scouring the internet for any news we have on the next book coming out, because I need to know more about what's going to happen, especially after Oathbound's cliffhanger ending, and I just adore this series. It is so good. Like I said, it's getting better with every single book and really showed me what retellings can do, and I am now like completely and utterly in love with it, and it is actually, I think, my favourite ongoing YA series right now, because it is just so well done. It made me fall in love with retellings and I just adore it. I also need to mention Aru Shah here as well, because this Roshani Chokshi book series really worked for me as well, because not only was it a middle grade, not only was it a retelling, but it also had a lot of things in here that reminded me of Skullduggery, in the sense that it was a very similar sense of humour. There was also a lot of pop culture references in here as well, which admittedly sometimes made me feel old, because Aru at one point literally says that The Matrix is a really old movie, and I literally sat there and read that and went, I was Aru's age when I first watched that. God, that just makes me feel old. I won't lie, it made me feel very old to read that line. But apart from that, I did really enjoy these books, and it really inspired me actually to read other books based from other cultures, because up until that point I was very much just reading like American and English sort of based books, and then this one made me really go, wait a minute, I should be reading more outside of that. I do not do it anywhere near enough, admittedly, but I do love doing it, and it all started with this book. Then also when I was in my early 20s, I discovered comics, because at the time, until I was like, it was 2016, so it was 10 years ago, so until I was 20, I hadn't really read comics. I had read the Avril Lavigne Make 5 Wishes, because I was a massive Avril Lavigne fan, hence the jewellery and the black nail varnish. I absolutely idolised her, so I read her ones, and then I also read a couple of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer ones, but I had never really read any Marvel comics, even though I had grown up watching them from the age of 7 with the X-Men, the Fantastic Four and all the rest of it. And then Doctor Strange came out, so in the lead up to Doctor Strange, I was already like in 7th heaven, because Benedict Cumberbatch was my favourite actor at the time. He's still in my top 2. He's just currently fighting Sebastian Stan for supremacy in my head. Won't lie, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, he was about to become Doctor Strange. We'd seen all the set photos, I'd seen the trailer, everything else, and I wanted to know more about his character, because it was Marvel, I was already hyperfixated. It was Benedict, I was also hyperfixated. They were coming together, I wanted to know more. And so I'd heard that he was basically a consulting superhero who lived at 1778 Bleecker Street in a house that was bigger on the inside, and he also, in the movie at the very least, was going to be using the Time Stone to travel in time. So I went, so he's essentially Sherlock Holmes meets the Doctor smack together. Okay, I'm in, I'm spying a new favourite Marvel character. And obviously he's so much more than that. He's not just that, but the similarities really got me at the time, and that tipped me over the edge, and I went, okay, I'm going to start reading comics. So I looked it up, started searching, and found The Oath, which is a really good starting point for Doctor Strange. There was actually a couple of Sherlock references, funny enough, in it, which brought me so much joy, I won't lie. And I really loved it, and I went, okay, I want to read more comics. So I read a couple of others, enjoyed them quite a lot, and then I fell across House of M, and this is where I fell head over heels in love with comics, and this is where the comic book obsession really started, because this one is the like absolutely infamous moment where Wanda says no more mutants, and basically depowers every mutant in the world apart from about 200 of them, and this entire run, this entire event is about the fallout from that, and this just blew me away. I absolutely adored it. At this point, for context, I went into this one with no context whatsoever. The things I knew about Wanda was that she had a brother called Pietro and her dad was Magneto, and she was married to Vision. I did not know that she had children. At this point I knew she was a mutant, but that was about it, as she's now not a mutant, but that's just comics for you being rewritten. But anyway, at the time she was a mutant. I knew that her dad at the time was thought to be Magneto, Magneto. I did not know about the children. I did not really know about the extended X-Men universe further than who I know from the movies and things like this, and this one really showed me exactly what comics can be and what the scope of the X-Men stories can be and the message of the X-Men and everything else, and how the entire world in the comics interacts with each other, because you've got the X-Men running around in here, you've got the Avengers, you've got Doctor Strange as well, and absolutely everybody who can get involved gets involved in this comic, and it made me realise just how cool comics can be, and ever since then I have loved comic books. It completely and utterly blew me away with its cleverness, everything that happened in this one, between the mutants getting depowered to them finally getting their powers back. Genuinely, that made me emotional reading that bit, to Avengers versus X-Men, all of the fallout from that, and all of my favourite runs, or a lot of my favourite runs, have actually come out from this one and have actually been like a consequence of this one, and it just made me fall head over heels in love with comics, because I knew that they were fun, I knew I enjoyed myself, but this one really showed me just how good comics can be, and I will never get over it. It's still my favourite event to this day. It is still my favourite comic. I will still recommend it to absolutely everybody, and I will mention it every single time I want to mention how I want this to be in the MCU. If I'm talking about comics I want to be adapted, this is at the top of the list, because it is so well done, it's so brilliant and so iconic. It was my first ever comic. It could have crashed and burned for me because I knew nothing about anything, but I adored every single second of it, and I have not stopped loving comics ever since. And now, as for my more adult years, there's a few other things I also need to mention. First of all is Elmont Nickel, specifically Show Us Who You Are. This was my first ever Elmont Nickel book, and again it showed me what middle grade can be about, and also the fact that there can be stories about neurodivergent characters who have happy endings and can actually be treated respectfully, because up until this point I had read one other book that was written by an autistic author that was about autism, and that was Failure to Communicate, which I absolutely adored, but this one made me realise that I could also write autistic books of my own, which is definitely something I'm going to be doing in the future. I'm currently working on my middle grade. I'm about 10k off from finishing it at the moment, but this book and the rest of Elmont Nickel's books really showed me what I could do with books, and that I could write my own, and I will forever be thankful for that. And also Elmont Nickel to this day is one of the only authors who can make me cry at the end of a book, which is not easy. It doesn't usually happen, but she can make me tear up like nobody else. I also need to mention I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast Is Me by Jameson Shea, because this one really, and I keep on saying the word solidified, I apologise, but this really solidified my love of horror for me last year, because I had read a few. I had read things like Hollow Places and a few others that I really enjoyed, but this one blew me away with its horror tropes and the way it was written and the spooky nature of it and everything else. It showed me that I can not just like slasher horror and things like this, I could also like that slow, creeping, obsessional horror that this book is all about. I really enjoyed it. It's definitely going to be one I'm going to be returning to, and a series I'm going to be returning to, and also a genre of horror I will be returning to as well, because this one really showed me what horror can be and how much fun I can have with a horror book outside of your traditional slasher. And that is some of my favourite books I've read over the last 30 years, so I'm going to go because I've nearly run out of water and I've nearly run out of voice. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do give me a thumbs up. Comment down below, tell me a childhood favourite book you had, I would love to know. Or if you don't have that much time, leave me a witch emoji down below to let me know that you were here. I'll also leave a link as well down below to all of my social media if you want to check it out, including to the Comic Book Sanctum, which is my comic book website dedicated to explaining about comic books and the world of Marvel Comics and everything else, as well as a link as well down below to my YouTube channel that does the exact same thing if YouTube is more your style, or if books are more your thing, please click subscribe here, and over here will be the link to my previous video. But till next time everyone, bye!